Hi, everybody. Dr. Julie Panesi here. I'm an ethics professor at Huron College at Western, and I'm very delighted today to welcome Hannah Salamon-Vegh, who has agreed to speak with me and have hopefully a really interesting chat about the recent university vaccination mandates and the broader questions to do with the COVID vaccines generally. So Hannah, welcome. Thank you so much for chatting with me. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how we came to be chatting today?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor. I'm very thankful for everything that you're doing. And I'm going into my fourth year at Western. I am studying to complete my bachelor in music research. I'm also very involved with political things. I speak on Tanya Granick-Allen's show, Counterpoint, about twice a month. And I usually go on a bunch of different podcasts because I'm very invested in political things here in Canada. And we met online, where a lot of people are meeting these days, because I saw you with one of your videos and interview with Liberty Coalition Canada and on Maxime Bernier's podcast. And I was very encouraged to see another professor, an academic, speaking out about matters regarding vaccination and the lockdown. So that's how we met. I reached out to you and we're here today.
Well, we're in a very small group. I may be the only actually, I know of one other Western professor who has concerns and questions like mine, but yes, we're in a very small group, which, you know, historically doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, but it does mean that it's tough to find strength in numbers, right? So let's jump right in. On May 27th, Western announced that it would be mandating vaccination for all students living in residence. Right. We are, you know, a month and a half away from that now, and we're seeing students grapple with this decision. I just wonder, what do you think about the university's decision to mandate vaccination for residents?
Yeah, so I was not surprised at all. Like I saw this coming. I was worried that it would be all across campus. As of right now, it doesn't seem like Western's going to do that. But I mean, we see their policy decisions and those of many governments and universities to be changing all the time. So I'm still holding out hope that they will not mandate it across campus. But even in residence, I see that as a violation of people's rights to live in residence. They're going to be putting it in the contract. So you have to sign the contract. And one of the things is that you have to provide proof that you've gotten both doses of your COVID-19 vaccine. And so far, what I can see, all the language, I researched it, but they're only going to be potentially providing accommodations for medical or religious reasons, but there is no mention of the word exemption. So there's a big difference between accommodation and exemption. And I even found for myself when masks were mandated across campus, they said that, you know, there could be accommodations under the Ontario Human Rights Code. I went to seek accommodations for medical reasons, and there was no such thing. You would be treated like a second-class citizen if you couldn't wear masks. So I expect the same thing to be regarding living in residence. I understand people can live off campus. It's absolutely, you don't have to live in residence, but I just see this as, you know, more and more encroachments on our rights and freedoms. And I'm wondering if they're testing the waters with this and see how it will fly, and then potentially now or in the future mandate it across campus.
Yeah, we, you know, I think one thing that people might say is that, well, why is this such a big deal? Because students have the choice to live on campus or to live off campus. And even if we grant that Ontarians have a right to access education, maybe they don't necessarily have a right to live on campus, right? What do you say to that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I have gotten in discussions with students about that. And I find it interesting that many of the same students who said that education is a right now are saying, oh, you don't have a right to live in residence. So they're changing the rules based upon how they feel. And I agree, like Western can have standards for our behavior and things like that for living in residence, but if they're not going to be offering proper exemptions and not treating students who cannot get the COVID-19 vaccine for various reasons as second-class citizens in residence, or maybe accommodations, what I've heard might be that you can't even live in residence. And I mean, so many people have said, you know, masks are not the hill to die on, or, you know, maybe the vaccine in residence is not the hill to die on, but like, when will the hill be to die on? And the government is constantly, and even like private businesses, or Western is a government funded institution. So they do have to abide by not only the charter, but also the Ontario Human Rights Code. And so they're just constantly testing the waters to see how much we'll put up with and how desperate we are for our education or to live in residence or whatever, and how much of our rights and freedoms we'll be willing to give up for those things that we need.
You say testing the waters, Western might be testing the waters to gauge student response. And it sounds a little bit like you might be worried that we're embarking on a slippery slope here, that if Western allows vaccine mandates for campus or for residents, why not allow it for in-person learning? Why not allow it for everybody in London? Why not make it mandated for elementary and high school? It's just a sort of a slippery slope. Where is that hill to die on for you? I mean, what if Western does mandate vaccination for all in-person learning activities? What would your personal response be?
Right. I've definitely thought about this long and hard for myself. And I know I have other friends on campus in various programs who would not be okay with a mandate like that and would not take the vaccine under any certain circumstances for various reasons. And yeah, definitely that would be my hill to die on. I've already looked at, legal action that can be taken because a government funded institution like this can't make, blanket health mandates without proper exemptions where they do not treat people who are not able to get the vaccine if they don't treat them with respect, and if they treat them like second-class citizens. That's a huge concern of mine.
Well, this is, for the record, this is my hill to die on too. There's nothing, I mean, not even a threat that I'll lose my position will make me take one of these COVID shots. And that doesn't mean I'll go away quietly. And I'm very happy to state publicly that I will use every legal resource available to ensure that they can't eliminate my position. But if that's their goal, I'm willing to step away from my teaching position. And I think that's a shame, because one thing we're seeing now is we're seeing a real dilution of a diversity of opinions within academic institutions,
Yes.
within science, within medicine. And these are fields that move forward, that achieve great advancements for humankind because we allow for a diversity of opinion, because we allow for open dialogue and open discourse. And I never thought in my lifetime, and I don't know about you, that we would see the kind of censorship and the kind of restriction of discourse and public opinion that we're seeing right now, right? So I think that's something, that's a political issue, an issue of democracy, aside from the COVID specific issue that I think is worth fighting for, right?
I agree.
To take us back to the sort of the issue of what students are thinking about the vaccine mandates. I was reading last week that a political science student from McMaster, his name is Andrew Mrazowski, he's also the editor of the campus newspaper, and they were interviewing him and asking him what he thinks about the McMaster not mandating vaccination. And he said, well, actually, I would feel really uncomfortable sending my reporters to cover events if they haven't been vaccinated. So, he's pushing for McMaster to institute some kind of vaccination mandate. And what do you think about positions like Andrew's?
Yes, I read that article, and I find it very interesting because if vaccines work, if that person gets a vaccine or anyone else who wants it, then they don't have to worry about people who have not gotten the vaccine.
Supposedly, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even Andrew Cuomo said that, and Andrew Cuomo is one of the most pro-vaccine politicians ever. He just recently said that, and we know that, like, if your mask works, if your vaccine works, you do not have to worry about other people who potentially have not gotten the vaccine. And it's very interesting how we're seeing people so concerned. They're more concerned about other people. And I think it goes down to control. These people don't actually care about other people's health and safety. And unfortunately, like, I've seen the trend not only with socialism for a long time in academia and the time I've been at Western, but now pushing into communism. And I've had classes at Western that are teaching pro-communist stuff. And now we're seeing the fruits of this, where even at Western, they're saying that health and safety, corporate health and safety of everybody is more important than individual rights and freedoms. And individual rights and freedoms always have to come first, because if we start treating people like a collective and not thinking about the individual, because every single person is different, then we start having these different types of violations that we know historically have resulted in terrible crimes. And I just wish that people would learn from history so we don't repeat these same things in our time. And also, I mean, if people just looked at the statistics about COVID, here in Canada, since we were aware about COVID, 14 people have died from COVID between the ages of 0 and 19. And 64 people have died from COVID between the ages of 20 and 29. And obviously, each of those people are incredibly important, and we're, terrible loss for their family, for them. And we don't want anybody to die from COVID. But if you look at the fact that, it's 14 plus 64, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of university students who COVID plays no risk to them, but they're petrified that if everybody around them doesn't have the vaccine, then they might die, which is completely not in line with reality.
There's a lot of fear, isn't it? And when I talk to people and ask them about, why are you deciding to get the vaccine, or why are you deciding to give your children the vaccine when it becomes available for those under 12? And usually the conversation turns to fear. I'm just terrified that they'll get long COVID. I'm just terrified that they're going to die. And, as you, I think, quite rightly point out, the statistics show that a conservative estimate is that, children have a statistically insignificant and approaching zero risk of suffering badly from COVID or dying from COVID. And in almost all of those cases that you mentioned, there were comorbidities, reasons that children had compromised immune systems to begin with. And we've seen very little discussion of immunity, increased immunity strategies in discourse, in public discourse generally.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to bring you back to is you mentioned earlier that we're seeing a sort of a socialist, almost communist or maybe communist minimizing of individual rights for the sake of group rights. And I was going to ask you, do you remember the slogan, "My body, my choice"?
Yes.
Yeah. So who was really trying to use that in order to, right? Feminists pushing for pro-choice. Very conveniently, we haven't heard that slogan appealed to since COVID began, I think. And it's because you can't have it both ways, right? Either we have the right to make decisions about our health and our body, or we don't. So do you think it's convenient that we no longer see reference to that? Do you think that feminists and people in society generally are willing to give up rights to abortion in order to secure rights to have other people vaccinated?
Yes, it's interesting because I've had conversations with people about this because I'm the president of the Pro-Life Club at Western, and I believe in bodily autonomy, like for the woman and for her child. And I find most of the people that are arguing with me and saying that they are proponents of mandatory vaccines, they're also proponents of abortion, and they will not. They want both. They will never give the hill up on abortion, and they think that. They honestly, they don't realize they have such terrible cognitive dissonance. So yeah, they want both. And I find that fascinating because when you think about individual rights, it has to be, like you said, one way or the other way. You can't have them both at the same time because it's incredibly contradictory.
As you say, they can't have both. And I take it what you mean by that is they can't both be pro-abortion and pro-vaccination mandates, right? So it's 100%. Not just that they want to have access to the vaccine themselves. They want
everybody else has to get it too.
Everybody else.
And this is the thing, because like individual choice is so important. Everybody should have the right of what they want to do with their own body, as long as it doesn't harm someone else. And this is the thing, people who are pro-vaccine, often they say, well, if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to harm other people. But we're not seeing that type of thing with the risk that COVID poses, especially to university age people. And if you want to protect yourself against COVID, get the vaccine. It's very simple. And we have herd immunity already here in Canada with the amount of people that have gotten the vaccine or have gotten COVID.
I know that you are thinking a lot these days about what things will look like in the future and how society is going to be structured based on having two classes of citizens, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Do you anticipate that we are looking at something equivalent to a contemporary version of apartheid and segregation, a caste system, a class system, a hierarchy of citizens that will be accorded, different benefits, freedoms, luxuries, things like that?
Well, I mean, in the words of Doug Ford and Jason Kenney, they have said, as well as many other politicians, the vaccine is your ticket back to freedom and back to normal life. Right. So they've made it abundantly clear that if you want to go back to our rights before all the lockdown measures and the states of emergency, then you have to get the vaccine. And I think that how much people are willing to put up with is going to determine what will happen, because even though these politicians most of them have forgotten that they serve us and we don't serve them, they're also conscious about re-election. The unfortunate thing is so many Canadians are okay with vaccine passports. They're okay with mandatory vaccines because they have not thought the consequences through. So many of them are bound by fear. They only watch CBC. They don't do the research for themselves and that type of thing. So it's in a democracy, democracy is amazing, but it's also dependent on how educated people are and how much they care about rights and freedoms.
Mhm.
because if enough people are okay with vaccine passports here in Canada, which kind of seems the trend when you look at polls. I know that polls are usually in relation to the demographic of people that enter them, but still, there is a huge trend to that here in Canada. And if enough people are okay with it, our politicians are going to push that. And Justin Trudeau has already talked about that. And even here in Canada, people who get the vaccine don't have to stay in the COVID hotels anymore. But if you don't get the vaccine, you still have to stay in COVID hotels when you come back into Canada. So already seeing trends towards that. I believe that's what our politicians want. They're just trying to see how much people are willing to accept.
Mhm. Do you think we live in a democracy in Canada now?
Well, we still have our democratic foundations. We still have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Bill of Rights, our, individual human
I
rights
hear
codes in all
that.
the
I think they
provinces.
must be in a library somewhere. Nobody's taken them out for a while.
Yes, but they are completely suspended right now. That's and it's fascinating because whenever the government violates our rights and freedoms, the onus is on them to prove that these violations are demonstrably justified. So they have to provide evidence to show that the risk of COVID or whatever situation is worth the violation of our rights. We have not seen them be able to prove any of that yet.
I agree with you. And yet you see what's happened in, with a lack of providing that sort of evidence, right? And I think
Yes.
we're just at the beginning of seeing how all of this is going to work through the judicial system. I sat in on the Adamson barbecue
Mhm.
trial about a week-ish
Mhm.
now ago. And it was horrifying, if for no other reason than because the judge was, regardless of what you think about the outcome of the trial, the judge was completely disinterested in looking at the evidence presented. And, I kind of joke about the charter, being in a library somewhere that we're not paying attention to. And you say, well, these things are still in force. Well, they're only in force if we have particular judges, particular
Absolutely.
lawyers who are willing to employ them, enforce them, make decisions on the basis of what is said there. And it isn't clear to me that we're seeing that now, right?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, because I know there have been a lot of like COVID tickets and all that have been dropped by the Crown because of work, by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and other places.
Thank goodness
But
for them.
right, they're absolutely amazing. But so far, Pastor James Coates' trial is the only one that has started to go through. And so far, the judge has said his preliminary kind of wording is that Pastor James Coates' rights were not violated by being in prison. And I researched this judge, and he used to be a criminal defense lawyer for many, many years, and he defended some of the worst criminals ever here in Canada. And everybody has the right to legal representation, regardless of what you've done. However, I don't know how you get from defending terrible criminals to saying that a pastor's rights have not been violated by sitting in jail when his
Because you're
church.
still defending terrible criminals. That's why.
Right, you're defending the government. So yeah, and so when the pastor never had any cases come out of his church or whatever. And then same thing with Adamson barbecue, because he challenged the government to hopefully, have precedent, because so many cases are ruled on precedent, not only what the Constitution says. But yeah, to have a judge like in the Adamson barbecue case say that, oh, this is not my legal jurisdiction, or just like totally dismiss it, is very, very concerning, because these, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution, all that, they can be violated, right, by various mandates, but then they need to go to the courts. If we don't have judges ruling according to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Constitution, then I don't know what a democracy is anymore.
Neither do I. Good question. I want to bring you back to two Western specific things.
Yes.
I don't know if you will have seen this, but it was just Monday in the National Post. There was an article published by Anthony Skelton. I don't know if you know who he is. He's an associate professor of ethics in the philosophy department on main campus at Western.
Okay.
And he co-published this article with a British postdoctoral fellow. And the article, I forget the title exactly, but it was basically about 3 reasons why the COVID vaccines should be mandated for children. The article starts off with an error, because he and his co-author state that the COVID vaccines have been approved for use in Canada, which they have not,
No.
right? They've received only emergency use
Mhm.
authorization in the States, and they're on the market under interim order in Canada. So the article, I hope people are skeptical enough or scrutinizing enough when they read it to catch that there's an error in the first line. But anyway, he goes on to argue that COVID poses substantial risk, that the vaccines are safe, easy, cheap, for children, and that even if children were not at serious risk for COVID, they should take the vaccines to protect others. And I just wondered what you thought about that. I'm kind of catching you off guard here because you probably haven't seen the article, but that's kind of the gist of it. So.
Well, it's very interesting. So I haven't seen that article, but the CDC has received reports of more than 300 cases of heart inflammation in young people after COVID-19 vaccination. And now the WHO is recommending, and the CDC are recommending that there be a pause on people under the age of 17, but especially like 13 and under, people who are called children, but specifically for them, they're recommending that a pause on vaccination be done right now so there could be further research, because we're seeing concerning amounts of heart inflammation in children. And the thing is, the vaccine has not been properly tested on anybody, let alone children. And there have been, I forget the doctors, there's been a ton of doctors and scientists like from Oxford and all that. They signed this big declaration. I forget the declaration right now, but they said the whole idea that
the Barrington Declaration.
Great Barrington Declaration. Yes, they said the whole idea that children are passing COVID on to seniors or people at risk is completely false, because most children are not asymptomatic carriers, and even most children are not seeing their grandparents right now. And most of the deaths with elderly people have been in retirement homes and nursing homes where children are no one's seeing them right now. Mm-hmm. So that's a false premise there. And like you said, the vaccine has only been approved for emergency use. It has not been gone through any of the trials properly, and no vaccine has ever been approved in less than 1 year. So that's a concern for anyone, especially children, where COVID does not present a risk to them.
One thing we worry a lot about in ethics in terms of public health is we always try to be on the lookout for disproportionate harms, right? So when the treatment proposed creates greater harms than the thing that it's supposed to treat,
yes,
that's an ethical red flag, right? And I think we've got red flags all over the place right now. One of the things that's, I think, really concerning is that we're seeing out of the adverse reporting
mm-hmm.
system in the States,
yes.
We're seeing that there are a higher number of deaths associated with the COVID vaccines than for every other vaccine on the market in
yes.
the last 20 years. Now, when that bit of information is presented to health officials, for example, I presented that particular bit of information through email to Chris Mackey, and Chris Mackey is the director for the Middlesex Health Unit. So for those who are watching, Western University is in London and we're in Middlesex County. So the health unit that covers that county is the Middlesex Health Unit, and that's run by Chris Mackey. So I presented that to him and I said, what do you make of this? And he said that, and this is a direct quotation from an email, he said, if you give a vaccine to a high-risk population in the setting of a pandemic, you will see deaths after the vaccination that are due to the underlying risk factors and the pandemic. Correlation is not causation. So if I understand Dr. Mackey correctly, the VAERS data doesn't indicate any adverse effects from vaccination, but is just showing how problematic COVID itself really is, right? And when you start vaccinating people, you're going to see adverse effects from the underlying disease, which is COVID and not vaccination. He also goes on to say, a direct quotation, the risks of the vaccine are dwarfed by the risks of the pandemic. This is the person who is ultimately making the decision to implement the vaccine mandate for Western residents and possibly other mandates in the future. Any comments about that?
Yes. So what I find fascinating, last year when masks were starting to be made mandatory in municipalities and cities and all that type of thing, Dr. Mackey said on his Twitter page, and I screenshot those tweets because I was expecting, they could go away. So he said that here's like the reasons why I am not pro mandatory masks, because of individual rights and freedoms. And, they may, just the cloth ones may not actually work to protect you against COVID, all that type of thing. And then our wonderful mayor, decided that it was a politically advantageous thing to do to mandate masks. So he said, with or without Dr. Mackey, we are mandating masks. And so he managed to twist Dr. Mackey's arm. And ever since then, Dr. Mackey has been coming out with all this type of stuff, which I think is incredibly irresponsible, because we don't have a proper data on the vaccine. What are these people going to say in the future if we find out that the vaccine had way worse consequences and negative side effects and everything like that than we even imagined? And that's why when there's any sort of risk, there has to be informed consent, and we cannot have coercion. So this is something I wrote a paper on this recently, but we are seeing a terrible amount of coercion. I mean, if something is mandated. I mean, I don't know how more coercive you can get with that. But anytime health related, when a doctor is giving treatment to someone, they have to make sure that person is not under coercion to receive that treatment. This is under the guidelines for doctors here in Canada. And people are receiving terrible coercion to get the vaccine. They're not going to be able to work or go to school, all that type of thing. It's
Just social
incredibly,
pressure,
yeah, it's
which is really
incredibly
coercive.
irresponsible. So I am very sad to see. I even read the letter that Dr. Mackey sent to Western saying that they should mandate the vaccine. I found it interesting that he said there should be, exemptions put in there for rare situations. He used the word exemption and not accommodations, which Western went on to use the word accommodations, which is not the same thing as exemptions. But yeah, I've been really sad to see, and this just goes to point out that most medical doctors and health officials, they are not immune to being pressured by politicians. That's exactly what happened here with our mayor pressuring Dr. Mackey. And these people are not unbiased. They can make mistakes too. And most of this is just what's politically advantageous. And so many health officials are bending to the politicians, and many of the politicians are blaming it on the health officials. And eventually they're going to be passing the potato back to us and hot potato back to us. And that's why here in Ontario, with the reopening, the 3 stages of reopening that we're currently in right now, it's based on vaccination status to put the pressure on us instead of our politicians.
Never before has our health been used as such a political weapon, right?
Yeah.
What do you think we can do, Hannah? You're a student, I'm a professor. People watching, or they have children, they have jobs, they have, what can we do? Because honestly, not much that I have done. So I've written to every major media outlet in Canada and haven't received a response from any of them. What can we do? You know, back in November, Denmark tried to pass legislation to force vaccination, and the citizens went out into the streets and they made noise for 9 days and they banged pots and pans, and the government backed off. We haven't seen that in Canada. Do you think that's where we're at? Do we have to get our pots and pans? Are there any other options that are likely to be successful?
Yes, that's a very good question, because I know there are many people who care. They've been writing letters to their politicians. There are very few politicians who are listening here in Canada, and even politicians that I thought cared about rights and freedoms, that I thought were good people, they have sold their souls because it's politically advantageous right now. And I know it's very popular here in Canada, and especially in universities, to put down Americans for being rednecks and these barbarians or whatever. Like, the US is completely back to normal except for a couple of states, and they're completely fine. There's no need to be counted anymore. Things are back to normal. And I never be in a country where I'm looking over the border and I'm like, why can't we be like that? And it's embarrassing. Canada's becoming a national embarrassment. So I don't know if it's going to take more international scrutiny, because even Senator Josh Hawley from the United States, he was recommending that Canada be put on a watch list for human rights abuses. What is it going to take? Because often it's reputation that countries care about, not actual morality or what's right and wrong. So I share your same concerns. I wish more Canadians cared. I think the important thing is for those who know what's right to speak up. We have to count the cost. I don't think we should be undiscerning, because consequences come with speaking up for the truth and just even asking questions, which is sad, because universities are supposed to be places of inquiry and learning and growth, and we don't want to go back to the dark ages where you can't question medicine or science. So I think even just like for the selfish reason that you stood up for what's right, I stood up for what's right, everyone else that we know is standing up for what's right. We can never say, we can face our children and we can never say I didn't stand up. But I think that continually asking these questions, speaking, even though it seems like it's falling on deaf ears, I'm hoping in the future will prove to be fruitful. But we are in dark times here in Canada because not enough Canadians care about this.
I'm finished with a little anecdote here. In addition to teaching ethics, I also teach ancient philosophy, and Aristotle especially. And Aristotle was a virtue ethicist, and he talked a lot about courage. And whenever I teach that in the classroom, the students say, oh, courage, that's not something we really need anymore. That was in ancient times on the battlefield when you have to stand against the enemy. And I usually try to convince them, this was pre-COVID, try to convince them that, well, I think there's cause in contemporary society for the virtue of courage as well, and they never buy it. And I think now those of us who are going against the narrative, who are questioning the narrative, who are choosing to remain unvaccinated, who are pushing on our government will require more moral courage than we have ever required and probably ever will, hopefully ever will in the future. And you are certainly exhibiting that today, and with every interview you do and every action you do to try to bring to light what's really going on here and try to protect Canadians. And I can't thank you enough for that. I think this is going to be really helpful for people. And I hope everybody who is watching will just do a little bit, do what you can, keep the conversation going, right?
Absolutely.
And Hannah, thank you so much.
It's an honor. Thank you so much.